Rebecca Keed, a psychologist. She's worked in recruitment and people, and now she's in cyber.
Change for me, it's about an opportunity to grow, learn, and build on what's gone before and what you can create sort of moving forward. Sometimes you need to let go of some of the things that have happened before to evolve into where you want to go. And actually, sometimes it's the society which is the enabler of change and the enabler of improvement and getting better.
Hey everyone, well, welcome to another episode of MindHug We Got You. This is our series on change, and today got a very special guest, someone I've known for a fairly long time and a fairly serendipitous meeting we had. But Rebecca Keed, and Rebecca is a psychologist. She's worked in recruitment and people, and now she's working within organizational change and cybersecurity. So very, very topical given change more generally in the world. And we're going to talk to Rebecca in a minute, and I will give it to her to just introduce herself. And you've already met one of her colleagues, Tony. So Tony was on our podcast earlier. Rebecca and Tony are now part of Keen Cyber, and that's a cybersecurity consultancy. And Rebecca obviously brings the people and psychology know-how, and Tony brings his work with law, defense, all of those nice stuff. So I'll give it over to Rebecca. Rebecca, you want to just introduce yourself to the listeners?
Thank you so much. You did a great introduction for me there anyway, Raj. So I really, really appreciate that. And yeah, we did have a serendipitous meeting, but it's when two worlds collide and create a wonderful set of I was going to say fireworks, but bouquet of flowers, because it's been great getting to know you and indeed getting more involved in MindHug as well. So my background is, yes, people related, so recruitment and that side of things. I also have a psychology background as well, so with an undergrad in psychology and then specialised in sort of forensic psychology for my master's. So I'm really, really passionate about how the worlds collide in terms of people, their psychology, their behaviour, and technology, which is my technology and cyber, which is my other businesses. So yes, I also am founder and director for a community group called Cyber. So we're based in the Thames Valley, and this is a membership group, free to be a member, but we offer resources to enable businesses and people to better understand cybersecurity. No scare factors, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about some of that in terms of change as well. And yes, I work with Tony in Keen Cyber. So Tony is a fantastic security consultant who really believes in people first as well. So that's how our values align. And so we do amazing things together in terms of helping others with their cyber.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, lovely. And it's kind of, your journey is very similar, although you might have started at a very different side to me, but using psychology to change organizations, and cybersecurity became a huge part of what we do at MindHug as well, looking at the psychological barriers to change for organizational change more generally and social change as well, but cybersecurity in particular.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me to an open question, which we ask everyone. Rebecca, what does change mean to you?
Such a big word, and I think I can imagine a lot of your listeners are either waiting or with bated breath as well. This is going to be a powerful statement, or probably in fear of, actually, I don't really like change, so I'm not interested. So for me, it's about growth. So any area where we see change or we're evolving in some way is an opportunity for growth, whether that's in business, personal relationships, an opportunity to grow, learn, and build on what's gone before and what you can create sort of moving forward. So for me, it can be daunting, but it's equally exhilarating. So what you get at the end, you don't necessarily know, but there's always some sort of rewarding qualities that you get from enabling that change. And you can't grow without leaving some of those things in the past. And that's a sort of a true sort of psychological statement there in terms of when you're working on yourself or your individual person. Sometimes you need to let go of some of the things that have happened before to evolve into where you want to go. So yeah, it's all about growth for me, I would say.
Yeah. And that's amazing. I mean, because at MindHug, we always say there's basically two things that human beings are seeking. Actually, one fundamental thing human beings are seeking, and one is a subset of that. And I think human beings are seeking is experience and connection, right? And really, they realized the one barrier to that was sometimes safety, and that's where the resistance to change comes, because everyone starts focusing so much on safety, they forget that that was just a barrier that we had to overcome to actually get to the stage of growth, right? And you mentioned right in the beginning, which was around some people will have resistance to change. In your view as a psychologist, what do you think is driving that resistance to change?
Wow, it's a really big topic, and it's really unique for I would say every individual or business or sort of entity, and it really does depend on that individual. But for me, I feel like as humans, we are wired for routine. So even from an early age, and you'll see this in sort of parenthood, is that you start nurturing your baby into a routine. So they'll become in a sleep habit, they become in a feeding habit. So all of those, excuse me, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, we from such an early age, we're sort of indoctrinated with routine. So as soon as that routine changes, that can cause problems, and that's where the resistance comes up, because we're so used to doing something. We're not always like wanting to change things. We like predictability almost. And as we try and sort of look at the resistance, it's different for everybody. We have people who are more likely to be risk takers, and then people who are completely the opposite. But what that can do is that resistance can create a level of stress, anxiety. We start thinking things like, you know, what if I can't handle this? And we start doubting our own abilities. But it's really the fear of the unknown, because we don't know what comes next. And that change, what is the effect of that change? We've only got a small space where we can kind of predict. I know that technology is enabling us to predict things a lot easier. You know, we've got the use of AI and all these wonderful tools. But actually, in the long and short of it, we have no idea what happens after that change. And so, yeah, it's really crucial to really look at that resistance and why people resist. And it's not as simple as just, you know, change that idea and it will all be fine, because as humans we just don't know. We haven't got that sort of that glass magic ball that will tell us of the future, which is a shame, because I think a lot of us would really appreciate that. There's also the sort of the social impact of change as well. So how socially it can affect people. So, for example, if we're talking about sort of personality and things like that, embedding that kind of change within your personality is hugely difficult, and a lot of people are resistant. I'm going to also pick on things like addiction. So addiction problems, people becoming resistant to abstaining from those as well, because the fear of not having those is so great. And also the social impact as well. So how do they fit into society once they've created that change? So there's a whole host of wonderful research around how to enable and help those people who are particularly resistant. And don't forget, change for those who are neurodivergent is an absolute crucial factor. So those that do or lend to themselves to some sort of the spectrum of the neurodiverse, there's lots of different challenges within that spectrum, all different ways of why change isn't the forefront of their mind or something that they're going to be enabled to do. And so there will be resistance in that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in more detail as well, and addiction as well. And you touched upon that. You touched upon neurodiversity. In fact, I think the world is now saying we're all neurodiverse. It's neurodivergent is the term, because everyone is so different, because they're all processing things so differently. And we're going to touch upon this, and how addiction even is really boils down to psychological fears, as you mentioned, and the substance is actually not because. And obviously, you've seen this as a forensic psychologist, I'm sure, as well. And we have this tendency to paint someone's behavior a particular way and almost be judgmental about it, which actually stops change from happening at a more broader social scale as well, right? Because you don't know what fears are behind some of that, what behaviors, learned behaviors, what genetics hide some of that as well. But it's interesting that we keep going back to the term, and you mentioned it, I mentioned it, which is fear, right? And we live in a world where fear has taken over. And unfortunately, and we know this through brain scans, that the minute you're in a fearful state, your rational state of mind, so whether you call it the prefrontal cortex or whatever, it shuts down, right? You can biologically see this. And we think we are acting from free will, but we're actually acting from autopilot at that point.
Absolutely.
And the problem is we behave in ways in which our autopilot behavior is our way of seeking safety, which sometimes is in fight mode, which means you trigger someone else's fight mode. And you get into a spiral where everyone's on autopilot and everyone thinks people are doing something to them when it's actually life happening for them, kind of. Yeah, it's a very unusual thing that happens, but people need to break away from it. And it's difficult to do.
It's really interesting that you touched on sort of the fight and flight area as well, because absolutely. So when people are in fear, they do have a typical reaction. So it might be fight, it might be flight, it might be stay, it might be freeze, and it's unique to everybody. And you could ask a whole host of people, what would you do in a situation if somebody was attacking you? What would you do? And then I'd run away, of course. And actually in that moment, this is the autopilot you're talking about, that although there's a majority of people that think that they would run away, but actually in that moment, they might freeze or they might actually react, because you just don't know. And you evaluate the threats around you in such quick succession. So it's really like nanoseconds almost of that evaluation. And a lot of that processing is, been stored over years. And there could be some sort of faulty storing as they've gone along. So previous experiences may make you more likely to run or more likely to fight, for example. And I think going back to thinking about the fear, and this is particularly for sort of technology and cybersecurity as well. There's a lot of fear mongering around some of those aspects. So the fear that the cyber threats will come and get you, the dark web and things. And yes, while it's very, very serious and there is a lot going on, and that hackers do exist, I think there's a really good way of us being able to perhaps look at the rhetoric around what we're doing and how we're framing this, because the fear mongering isn't going to enable that safety, and it's in fact either going to make you fight or flight or freeze. If we are thinking about particularly sort of cybersecurity and the security within our sort of technology, the fear mongering isn't going to help. We're not going to get the right results. We're not going to see the right innovation and that kind of thing as well. So so fear for me is a huge factor in most of what we're doing.
And the fear is also being bred from fear, strangely enough. Because we did some research around talking to people about cybersecurity and why privacy is important, which it is. Don't get me wrong, privacy is very, very important. But very, very often, the answers we got was not always about identity theft and someone taking money. It was about, if my information comes out, I don't know how it's going to be judged, right? And so there's a fear that people are going to judge you, and judgment itself is an autopilot response that society has kind of developed. So, why as MindHug we focus so much on non-judgment is exactly for this, because, people behave particular ways because of autopilot reactions, because that's how they've been trained. And if we are going to judge ourselves and judge others based on those autopilot reactions, we're going to get into a completely unsurmountable spiral. And that's dangerous. It's also the rhetoric around why cybersecurity is important. It also is also something that needs to be looked at more from a technological, but as well as from a social and people perspective is what I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And our lives are so intertwined these days. So you can't really sort of separate the human from the digital aspect anymore. Whereas back in the day, people were going to school with a pen and paper, or depending on how old you are, a quill and some parchment. And now, we're all walking around with effectively our computers in our hands, and it's all there inside those phones that we've got now. We've got our bank cards. records, we've got our ID, our health records are all stored in digital capacity. So literally everything we're doing now is all digital. And so whilst we would buy a lock to lock our front door to keep us safe, we now need to start thinking about the types of locks that we need for our digital house. And the fear mongering around it just won't work. You won't see change, and you won't see people adopt those attitudes of how do I keep myself safe. I think it's enabling people to digest the information, because there's so much jargon out there, and they like the in any industry you get your acronyms and things like that. Just simplify it, and this is what Oxcyber does as well. Is we're trying to give information so people can take the information without feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be hacked, and having that fear and anxiety, and then implement what they need to do. So simple things like, looking after their passwords or changing them regularly. Two-factor authentication, which should be an absolute compulsory mandatory thing in any technological device that you have, quite frankly. It's about ensuring that we're thinking about how we ask people to adopt these good practices and good attitudes to keep themselves safe without that fear mongering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you talked about the devices we have. I mean, the really interesting thing is this thing over here, all right, it's more advanced than the technology that was used in the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1960.
100%.
Right.
Mine's more advanced than myself. What in this little machine is probably more advanced than me, evolutionary.
Correct.
Correct. That in itself is a huge breakthrough, isn't it? A huge innovation.
Absolutely. And let's touch upon this, because you've spoken about the technology, you've spoken about the social side, you've spoken about adoption, which is obviously MindHug's bread and butter right now, which we work with we work with the government projects, we work with organizations on adoption of organizational change, in particular through a psychological lens, which obviously you've helped with as well. So the question I have is, and let's break this down. Why is digital security so important right now? And you've touched upon it. If you had to summarize, why is digital security so important?
It's a really great question. I mean, I've got so many different reasons why it's important, but I think the main thing is just like I mentioned earlier, when you're locking your front door, you may not just lock your front door, you might have a security alarm now or a Ring doorbell. And that advancement that we've got, those capabilities are there for using, right? But with all of that comes the vulnerability and the risk. And so the aim is to keep you safe, but also they are another entry in for people that are smart. So it's how can you adopt the mindset that, okay, I've got my security features. So for example, like I'm just going to throw out sort of Microsoft, and loads of people use Microsoft for businesses, for personal and whatever. And actually Microsoft has some really great security features, and a lot of them you wouldn't even know about. And why aren't we sort of engaging with people to sort of teach them on those aspects of security and why it's so important? So everything that's kept on your phone, for example, you should definitely have a password on it, so a lock password. But again, is that going to be secure enough? Probably not. So make sure you've got your Face ID on there as well, and so your person would need your face. So it's just simple measures to maximize the security and the posture that you've got around what your estate is, or if it's your personal. That constantly thinking, how else can I make this safer?
Yeah. I mean, two things. I mean, it is about minimizing risk, right? And that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned Microsoft, which is really, really interesting, because, we know what happened with Microsoft recently, right?
Absolutely.
And despite all the investment, despite everything, despite them having state-of-the-art, ex-military through CrowdStrike, the world came to a standstill, right? So the point is, it's about minimizing risk. And minimizing risk doesn't mean there's going to be a zero pill, right? And we need to appreciate that. I think studies have now shown that 50 to 80% of digital security leaders have said that at some point they have had some sort of breach on their data.
I think that percentage is probably higher by now as well.
Correct. And so I expect everyone will at some point get breached, right? The point is, how do you minimize the risk of that happening, and how do you minimize the psychological impact of that as well? Okay?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's really, really important because you feel, like you said, it's like a break-in,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
And the same psychological element that you have with a break-in,
Yeah.
you feel vulnerable, you feel exposed. And that's the same thing with a digital security attack, right?
It is.
And that boils down to not only how the individual deals with that, but also how society helps the individual
Mhm.
through those, and helps them realize it's not that big a deal. And even today, we're there. We got you in the name
Absolutely.
of the podcast,
There's,
right?
there's
So,
definitely there's some really great resources out there. So if people have had a breach or they've been hacked or they just want a bit of advice, I think there's the cyber helpline which is started up. So I think it's a number that you can call and just ask for advice if you're needing some help. So I think it's about us all collaborating together and building together to make sure that people do feel safe. And you're absolutely spot on that the effect of your house being broken into and your things stolen is the same feeling and emotion as it is on your phone or any of your devices. And that's what I think people forget. They just think, oh, it won't happen to me because it's so far removed. And actually it can happen to anyone. You like Microsoft, it happens, right? CrowdStrike, all of the different big brands that we think are there to sort of keep us safe, they have breaches too, right? They have issues. And so it's about minimizing that risk, knowing that there are organizations out there to help you and to give you advice if you need some help, and and making sure that you're emotionally resilient to if something was to happen, how you react to that. So your resilience is key for that area.
and resilience is an individual and social thing, right?
Great.
As you said, it's individual, as in you have to realize sometimes that what we think is so catastrophic that it's the mind's way of dealing with threats. But I mean, I think there was a study done on this that psychologists have actually traced for a reasonably large sample of the fears that people have versus what actually happened. And they found between 85 to 90% of the fears that people had never materialized. But I think we've discussed this study in the past as well.
I think we have, and I'm one of those people. I always think what's going to happen, like the worst outcome, and I assume that that's what's going to happen. I don't. There's a whole host of reasons why, and then actually,
it's confirmation bias.
Absolutely, right? And I will seek out the confirmation to make sure that I'm right because I like to be right. And I'm not always right, but I do like to be right. And so, that in itself is a really, really difficult emotional behavior to change as well. So getting out of that habit of assuming the worst all the time.
And this is a really good point to actually discuss information more generally, right? So why do we have confirmation bias? And this is, so in my head and in all the research we've done at MindHug, the reason for confirmation bias fundamentally boils down to the abundance of information we have, right? So just from this perspective, we say this a lot. In 2020 or 2019, when a study was done, it was estimated that we had created more information in the previous 2 years than all of human existence.
Absolutely.
We know today information is doubling every 12 hours. Right? So we have more information than we've ever had to deal with, which obviously means digital security becomes very important, which is part of the reason why digital security is important. But what does this do to human beings generally, right? And this impacts not only adoption of digital security measures and organizational change measures, but life more generally, right? People cannot filter through so much information. They build shortcuts. They build shortcuts, heuristics, as it's called in social science, right? And one of the heuristics has been to focus on safety. So just look out for threats, right? And the problem is when we keep looking out for threats, and we see this because the mind is like a muscle. You can see neurons thickening the more you use them. And it's like my right hand, when I pick up this mug of coffee, I'm going to use my right hand. I'm not going to go to, but my default position is going to be my right hand because my brain knows that's the stronger arm, right? And it's the same with confirmation bias. The more we start using the threat mode and the more we start catastrophizing, the more the mind keeps looking at the world through a threat lens.
Absolutely,
right? Because it needs to filter through that information, and it's saying that information is predominantly threat, which it's not, but it just tells it, and it just looks at threats. which means we get into a spiral of catastrophization
Yes.
because this confirmation bias happens. The confirmation bias reaffirms that neuron, that neuron gets stronger, and we get into a negative spiral.
Yes. Absolutely.
And it's autopilot.
Yeah.
It's autopilot.
And
So,
also, on the confirmation bias, you're right. So it's the negative, but it also can work in the positive as well. So it can go the opposite way. So, and just going back to your psychological safety, is that we're constantly, as humans, seeking that feeling of comfort and safety. Even if it's in a negative experience, we will still go and seek out whatever we need to justify why we are in that position. Oh, and it can be from any source. I mean, social media is probably the quickest way that someone can justify where they are, to help them feel safe, even if they're in a negative space. And it's difficult for people to understand when, and I'm just going to go back to the addiction. So if somebody doesn't have an addiction, looking at those that do and understanding that they're validating their behavior all the time. So it's really difficult to get them to change when everywhere they look, and it's usually their social circles, they're having a drink, or they live near a pub or whatever, which is constantly giving them those cues that they have to stay in there. And psychological safety and confirmation bias, to me, are hand in hand. They are skipping down the road together. Like, come on, if you want a bit of this, you need a bit of this, and it's really difficult to even try and comprehend whether it's on the negative, and it's up to you as an individual to decide where you're at, and figure out whether it is the negative or the positive.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I actually think all biases in the world are subsets of confirmation bias.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah,
I know the world talks about whatever. Some talk about 27 biases, some talk about 50. Yeah, the different people, the different number of biases that they talk about. I actually feel they all boil down to confirmation bias. And I remember my you know that I went through quite significant mental health challenges for a long time, including psychosis. And I actually feel my psychosis spiraled because of confirmation bias, because I was just confirming the fears that were within my psychotic episode, right? And it just went out of control. And and it was reversing that. As you said, there's a reversal which can get you out of it as well. And that reversal had to come when I realized the conditioning that had shaped all of us as human beings, and the judgment that we put on ourselves and others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Afterwards starts feeding that confirmation bias. And that comes from a place of fear.
Yeah.
I've said this in previous podcasts as well. There's a very, very interesting interview by Mike Tyson where he talks about a very, very dark period that he went through in the 90s, as we know. He was not a very liked person in the 90s. And Mike Tyson said something, and he's like, I look back at that time, and he's like, I was just afraid. And if you ask me why I was afraid, I don't even know.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a very, very powerful incident.
I bet. I would be really interested to hear how far he's got with exploring that idea of, what he was afraid of back then, and hearing what his thoughts are as an adult, because it will be very different to how he's experiencing the memories which were back then. So he's got a different lens to look on that. And it'd be interesting because his background, he's got such an interesting story, whether you like him, you dislike him, it doesn't matter. He's got a very interesting story, and he's got one that we could definitely learn from, sort of as psychologists themselves, and particularly because he was in the ring as well. So one of the major sports, along with like rugby, where actually brain injury is absolutely critical to those, and they, if your brain's getting knocked around so much, for me it's inevitable, something's going to happen. And to be able to study perhaps Mike Tyson and understand what his sort of his learned experience is through his years would be fascinating.
He comes across as a very, very loving person now. Right, you see him, it's almost a philosopher level.
Great. He's got time now, hasn't he? He's got time now to really think about who he is as an individual, whereas back then the pressure was on.
And it was a kind of an autopilot response. Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that he's the first to admit it, that he did hurt a lot of people in that process. Okay, and that's where I think we need to look at this as a society. Is we need to figure out how people stop getting hurt. Period.
Yeah.
And help people who get hurt. Okay. Now that does not mean you stop blaming individuals and start dealing with that, but that doesn't mean you don't help people who are getting hurt as well, because that's what's going to lead to change at an organizational level, a social level, an individual level, and a well-being level.
Yeah, absolutely. And the change will take time, right? So whilst IT technology is evolving at a rapid speed, us humans are still evolving at we're still rapid speed, but we're still evolving, and we're a lot slower than the rest of the things that are there. And I think over time, we're starting to see really good change in our societies, for example, embracing diversity, embracing culture, race. There's still pockets of issues. And it blows my mind because I was really lucky. I got to grow up in a place where I wasn't a diverse, I say diverse, I'm still in the UK, right? So I wasn't in London, right? So it wasn't that diverse. But I'm able to see past all of those, and that's what my teachings were, my learnings. But yet there's still pockets of places where there are still huge changes that need to happen, all the different biases. And again, the confirmation bias comes in, right? So they see something that they don't like, so they'll go and seek out, i.e., go and find on social media posts that will validate that behavior, those attitudes. And for any meaningful change to happen, is we've all got to really come together and try and drag those that don't want to live in a society where we look after each other, we keep people safe, and help them change.
Absolutely. And you said some people are not able to come out of that. And that's what I was discussing the other day, that my mental health illness was not a punishment. It was a privilege.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was a privilege because it had to literally pull me out of autopilot mode. I had no other option. Okay. And it was a luxury to go through that. And it was a luxury to have the support that I had, which gave me the freedom to fail in so many ways. The freedom to fail continues today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which some people don't have.
I know.
Right?
And I think the failure as well, is a lot of it is in the individual. So that fear of failure, and it could be the upbringing and things. And actually, we need to embrace failure. I think some of the big brands, I think the sort of the Googles and things, really do try to embrace that. Keep failing, because we keep failing. I think it's Edison and the light bulb as well. He's failed how many times, and just using that analogy when you can apply that to yourself. And I really love how you've taken your experience and you've molded it into something that sits and feels comfortable for you to be able to move on. And it's great to be able to sort of firstly share that with you, and you're open to share that with us as well. But it's about applying how you did it and understanding the intricacies of what went on for you, and sharing that with others who might be in similar positions, so that they don't feel that it's a bad thing to have a psychosis. Although the media would tell you it's bad, and people go, oh, it's bad. Or even when people are in the current flow of psychosis, it can be very difficult to sit in their space because people don't understand, and it's scary, and it's, what's going on. I can't predict what they're going to do. And just enabling people to sit in that space, so long as, there's no harm to either person, but sit in that space. You might not understand what they're saying. They may not be coherent, but, just being there with them and holding that space for them, and and helping them come out with it with a wonderful reflection on where you came from, if that makes sense. A very positive way.
I appreciate that, Rebecca. But the truth is, it didn't happen in silos, right? If I had not had support, I hadn't had my parents, I hadn't had my friends, family, past and present, it would have been a very, very different situation. And it was everything. I had psychosis, depression, anxiety, OCD, and it came within a blink of an eye, right? It was sudden. And the interesting thing was, these learnings helped me. Once I had these learnings, everything started to dissipate.
Yeah.
Right. Everything dissipated. It was like the underlying reasons were just the thought patterns I had developed. Right. They needed to be rechecked. Right. And these were just manifestations of them. And we do look at this, right? We do look at this because we do look at the evolutionary reasons for a lot of mental health issues. And yes, there are chemical reasons, there are traumatic reasons, but there are some seriously major things that we do need to look at. Though there are studies that trace it back to an era of pre-language and how heightened states of emotion, depression, anxiety, all of these were ways in which we communicated pre-language. And the tribe would then use this as information with which they would help you. And once you would help, you would calm down to a baseline state. And what's happening right now is the tribe isn't coming. Hence why we have MindHug tribe over here, right? The tribe isn't coming, and the tribe isn't coming not for a lack of desire, but it's because the tribe themselves are fighting their own battles, and the tribe doesn't recognize the battles you're facing, and also we're just living more and more isolated lives.
100%, 100%. And, long gone are those tribes where, the grandmother would be at the top, or the elders, and what, their wise words like feeding down through the generations. And we don't have that. I mean, there's some places in the UK where you can still see those families that live together, which is great. But it's very few and far between. It's very few and far between. I know my family is scattered all over the UK. So, when we get together, it's like maybe once a year if we possibly can. And a lot of it's on the phone. So they wouldn't even know if I was going through anything unless I spoke up. And actually, when you're going through something, the last thing you want to do sometimes is speak up.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting because there were studies done, albeit this was done in the 70s, on serious mental health issues such as schizophrenia, etc. And they actually found that the prognosis of those with serious mental health issues was actually much better in developing countries than developed countries. Indeed, there was a slight difference in it being accepted at first, but once it was accepted as an illness, the prognosis was significantly better, and they linked it to social connection and acceptance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
They've got different treatment over there, though. So for certain things, and where we would call them a depression, like in India, it's sort of slightly different. They have a different role, and then also in Africa, it's completely different. It's almost like they've got spiritual possession and things of why someone would be melancholy and stuff, and their treatments and the way they do it is also different. But that's what I love about humans. I love how diverse people are, and in our sort of Western world where we've got Western medicines, we'd probably treat with a medicine and we can't understand. But actually, sometimes it's the society which is the enabler of change and the enabler of improvement and getting better. So, and I love those examples.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, let's talk about society and people now, and particularly in the cybersecurity side. So, how do we change the psychological side within organizations to help with not only just being better organizations, but also just adopting measures of change that are needed?
It's a really big question. So, and if I had the answer, I think I would have solved quite a lot of the world's problems. And I don't have the answer. And it's not a one size fits all approach either. So every organization is different, very much like family structures, organizational structures. They're all very, very different. And some have been molded over years and years and years. So we've got some really big institutions, the government, for example, and the public sector, those institutions. And we typically know that they are not so maybe, I don't want to use the word resistance, but they are very slow to change, and things can take a very, very long time. Whereas in the private sector, I think they've got a bit more choice to sort of change. But I think setting examples of how you want the change to happen, and when we know that people, and some people can be resistant to change, but when we know that change is a really, really difficult thing to build in and overcome, make plans for that. Don't. It's not going to happen overnight. Realize that it takes time. Very much like society, when we see societies change. So thinking back to some of the laws that we had, for example. I mean, some of the laws need to be changed for us to enable change in organizations. And so I think businesses need, and indeed people as well, they need to realize that change is inevitable. So if you want to grow and evolve, change is inevitable. And I hate to sort of bring in the AI concept, but it's here, right? It's been here for a long time anyway. But now People are embracing it in their everyday lives. They don't see it tucked behind the databases in their products anymore. It's in front of them. They can log on to a chat GPT and, you know, these changes are changing everything, and we need to embrace them. We need to understand them first and how they apply to not only ourselves, but our people, our organizations, and make a plan to factor them in because people like plans. People like to be checked in with as well. Ask the question, how do you feel about this? And, what's the impact on you? And what can I do to lessen the impact? Or, that for those that are a little bit more resistant, and I would probably say older generations, are more set in their ways. So they've had a whole host of changes throughout their life that they've had to sort of deal with. And I'm just thinking about my parents really, and particularly my dad. He's very resistant to change. He will not change for anyone, and he would tell you that. And I'm just thinking about if I was to, and I do try and talk to him about his cybersecurity and keeping safe. Don't click on those links, Dad, and don't do this. But he's resistant to it. It's almost like it doesn't compute for him. So, but it's about being softly, and you just keep on, right? You just keep, okay, well, let's try this and let's try this, trying to facilitate a seamless change. I mean, he's got a MacBook now, and that was me sort of forcing him to do it, and that's as much of a change that I've managed to do so far. So yeah, I think embracing the change, doing it slowly, think it out, plan it, and regular check-ins.
No, absolutely. And linked to that is your other business, which is your hiring business, your people business.
Yes.
How important is it getting the right people? And I want to define what right people means. I don't think there are ever wrong people, but there are people that fit the culture, that people fit the mission, that people who are on board. Because I find if you bring people who are talented and skilled, but they are not motivated, or they're not on with the mission or the leadership team, they're going to be in a constant state of threat mode, because there's going to be a kind of feel of an imbalance of power, right? Because there's no empowerment. And when you're not feeling empowered, you go into threat mode, and you're less likely to want to go with the company or see it as a joint mission. Or you're going to increase conflict with the organization. And this is our own organization, when we bring people who are lovely people, very, very talented, happily go to the pub and have a drink with them. But they just don't fit where we're trying to go with MindHug. And then it's trying to put a square peg through a round hole, right?
Which doesn't work.
Which doesn't work. And that doesn't mean the square peg is not useful. It is very useful, but it's just not the right fit to the hole. So how important is finding the right people for this? And how do you keep them going so they are with you and they see it as a joint mission?
Absolutely. And I love that you've asked that question, because it boils down to values. So what are your values? Get really clear on what your values are. And so when you are going through interviews or you're looking at applications, it's always good to have something around your values in there and see how they respond to those values. If they hold those values as well, the likelihood is that there will be a cultural fit of sorts. And then from those values, make sure you're really clear on your mission. Whatever your mission is, make sure you've got that statement and use that whilst you're either interviewing or you're doing your screening. And within that, it's like, how do you see, what do you see your role is on this mission? And get them to answer that question. Because it's great, you can tell people we're on a mission, you can come along with us, but it's like actually get them to think about how they can embed themselves in that mission as well, and get them really talking about what's important for them. And usually, I mean, you and I both know each other anyway, but I'm a culture first person anyway. You've got to have the right culture. The skills, some skills you can teach, but if you haven't got that right culture fit, it's always going to be a long and difficult journey, because you're going to jar. That said, there is a huge wealth of research by having diverse teams. But again, I'm still going to say that you can have diversity and you can build diversity in, because you don't want the same of you. Otherwise, you're just going to have a business which is just you really, and it's just one stream. You want those ideas, you want people to be different. They can still share your values. So what I'm not saying is, just go for people that are like you, which is typical for humans. We typically will see things in people that we identify. Oh, they're funny, I'm funny. So, oh, I like you. And actually, it's the values that underpin all of those personality traits, and that is in diversity as well. So we all share sort of different values, and some are more stronger than others, and it's getting really clear on those, and then asking how they see themselves, where they see their role in that mission to where they want to achieve. And then to get them to stay, you encourage them on their journey, enable them, give them the tools, give them the resources that they need. And, if they want to go off and do a course, find out a way that you can implement that course and blend it into what you're doing. Because when you empower your people and you give them empowerment, you get an excellent return, obviously, but what you do is you get great engagement and teamwork. And you get people that are invested in working as a team and not off on a sort of a silo and things like that. So empowerment is really, really key. And making sure that you're checking in regularly and your visions and your values and your missions are still aligning. And as a leader, particularly as sort of CEOs, directors, you should always be asking, like, how can I help? What can I do to support you? What do you need from me? And just asking those simple questions, usually you get the right answers to enable them to do what they want to do as well. So
yeah, and I think they both go tandem. In fact, they go step by step, right? You have to first hire the right people and build a culture of empowerment. The challenge I find with a lot of SMEs and startups in particular is they hire very quickly on, as you said, on instantly, right? Because they don't have enough time, they just need help, right? They need whatever help they can get. They'll hire on equity, they'll hire on, and they'll make some terrible decisions on hiring. And what that means is not only are you getting people who are not fit for the business, but then the gap between where they are and making them feel empowered is all that much higher.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you get people who are in line with your mission, the gap that you need to fill between them feeling empowered and remaining empowered is just that much smaller, right? It's bizarre, and we see this, and then you just get so much more work done.
Absolutely. And just touching on, you were saying about the small businesses that are quick to hire, and they usually are because there's either it might be a cheaper option, and that. But actually, once you're clear on those values, don't be so quick to hire. I appreciate that you need a job, but don't. Make sure that those values align, because it is more expensive and it will take more time once that person is in the culture. And then what happens if that person isn't the right fit, it's quite toxic for the rest of the team. And I'm not saying the person's toxic, please don't, but it's the combination of those elements which create explosions. And actually that doesn't lead to success and growth. So in my view and sort of in my experience, if you do need somebody quick, you get in a contractor. They're there to do a job, and they're really good. They know that they're a contractor, so they are in to fly in, do a job, and out. And what you find, I mean, I can't put percentages on it, but a lot of times the contractor starts at their role thinking that they're going to be there for a certain period of time. They're a little bit more expensive, but it's less expensive than when you have to say goodbye to an employee that didn't work out. And when they fly in and do a piece of work, sometimes they really love the environment. You love them, and there's a real sense of synergy that actually, let's do perm. So it's like a try before you can buy. But take your time. If you get an opportunity to work with people that, like recruiters or agencies or hiring agencies that are almost trained to find that cultural fit, that really understand the culture of the business, using those can mitigate quite a lot of issues and decision making, because as humans, we particularly leaders want to fill a role quickly, do it at cost and whatever, and actually sometimes that's not always the best option.
100%, and I agree. And this is something we've changed as well. Even for contractors, we hire slow. We hire slow, and we do testing. We do everything. And testing, we don't look at the scores just as a score, right? We look at where the gaps are in the team, right? So if someone is low on one thing, but we've got someone who's high on that, then we don't mind that, right? So it's because, like you said, diversity matters, and diversity, by the way, matters in more senses than we
Yeah.
think. And
Agree.
this is something you see in some of our workshops. We actually show our realities,
Yeah.
right? Not only our emotional and psychological realities, but the way we physically see the world, your works. So really, it's not only just seeing different viewpoints in the philosophical sense, but it's actually in the literal sense.
Absolutely.
You're seeing different viewpoints, and that's really, really important in product design and product sales,
100%.
etc.
Yeah.
So this is really important, and this is something that we kind of did, and you and I had discussions around some of what we wanted to do as MindHug and some of the past challenges we faced, and etc. And that's been part of why we even changed some of our recruitment processes as well. And it's making a difference. And it's not to say, and again, to reiterate, it's not to say the people were not good workers or they were not able to deliver. It's just they were not able to deliver in the environment that we wanted to be delivered, and the philosophy we had.
Yeah.
And we always wish them well. And we say, if in the future things change, we're always open for conversations.
Absolutely.
And we do see people coming back as well. And one last question before we close off. In your role as chief exec of multiple businesses over many, many years, is there a miss or a near miss that you look back and you say, I wish I did that differently?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. So, I'm obviously from a psychology background anyway, so I've kind of trained myself not to reflect back and see the learnings. So whilst they look like near misses or there were misses back then, they're not, because I've seen a path from what had happened where I thought it was not right, and I've actually gone, oh, okay. So my decision making, and it's critical when you are leading businesses. Your decision is critical to what's going to happen, and if there are certainly employees in your business as well, it's what happens to them, etc. So I guess I'd say in terms of near misses, I've probably had heaps and heaps and heaps, but I'd probably call them learning points, or I've had loads and loads of failures, but learning points. And I think one of the key messages, I might have made a decision on hiring, for example, and I may have misjudged and maybe hired quickly, because it happens to me too. So decisions with who you partner with, and because on face value, sometimes you're thinking, okay, this could be a great partnership, and then it just doesn't fit for whatever reason moving forward. But see them as learning opportunities. We're all learning. We can't know everything, and we're still evolving over time. So, so those near misses. But I've had some really, really great successes as well. And all the successes are down to the team that I have around me. And it's by working as a team that I can, share these successes. It's great to be successful on your own. It's even better to be successful when you've got people around to share things with. And I have such a fantastic team, and the success of the business is down to them, I would say. I'm literally just a sort of at the surface level, and I'm part of the team, obviously, but a lot of the stuff that they do is what keeps us going. So I'm truly, truly grateful. And so
Thank you, Rebecca. And reframing is what I'm taking.
Definitely.
Reframing, and the reason for the near misses was an ocean of information that we were trying to navigate, which is difficult to do.
100%.
And sometimes we make instinctive decisions, which are kind of autopilot. So if you feel safe in decision making, if you're informed, you probably would make a better decision. So I'm summarizing. And I'm trying to bring this into the MindHug approach, but it's just but correct me if that's not what I'm taking away something.
No. That's 100% correct. And the MindHug is, and I think every organization should be embracing the MindHug, because within your platform and your workshops, it enables us as leaders to help our people to work as a team, to make sure we are being the best versions of ourselves as well. So, that's definitely a success for me. So
I appreciate that. Well, thank you for your time, Rebecca. That brings us to a close. Before we go, just for our listeners, is there something you want to give them a song, a book, a quote,
Oh, wow.
anything that has helped you with change or helps you feel safe when your things feel a bit overwhelming.
Yes. And I suffer from overwhelm a lot. And I say suffer, I try not to sit in that overwhelm, but obviously being a leader, a number of businesses, people that you need to look after as well. So I guess this is just a bit of advice, really. For me, it's when I'm feeling overwhelmed and there's too much, I get organized. So I start writing things down so it's out of my head, because it's only because it's in my head that I feel overwhelmed. So write it down and only look at the things that you can control. So the aspects of life that are out of my control or it belongs somewhere else, I don't need to address those in such a way where I feel overwhelmed. So focusing on those, focus on the things that you can influence, focus on how your attitude is. So even just getting up in the morning and you're feeling like I don't want to face the day, actually finding those points in your day where you are feeling overwhelmed, those things that you can control, crack on, get them done. But those you can't, just put them to one side until such time that you can look at them.
Well, you heard it there from a psychologist and an organizational change expert. So, well, thank you, Rebecca, for being on We Got You. Wish you a pleasant week ahead.
Thanks,
And thank
Raj.
you again.
Take care.